Janitor fixes billion-dollar code bug after CEO walks away in frustration. At 6:12 a.m., Jerome pushed open the heavy glass doors of Lexicon Technologies, mop in one hand, thermos in the other. The lobby was still dark, bathed in the cool glow of security lights. He liked it that way, silent, clean, before the buzz of people pretending to be geniuses drowned everything else out. His boots squeaked gently against the polished floors as he walked past the receptionist's desk, unoccupied, at this hour, and into the heart of the building. No one ever looked up when he passed. Not the engineers hunched over their desks, not the interns who rushed past him with coffee and overpriced sneakers, not the middle managers busy perfecting their air of importance. They saw the uniform, not the man. To them, he was the janitor. Or if they even bothered with that, just the old guy. Jerome didn't mind. Not anymore. He moved through the corridors with muscle memory, emptying bins, wiping surfaces, making everything sparkle before the 9 a.m. rush. His badge didn't open any doors except the utility closets and bathrooms, but that didn't stop him from occasionally slowing his steps near the engineering floor, where glass walls framed screens filled with code, graphs, and data streams. Most days, no one noticed how long he stood there. He'd lean on the mop handle, just for a second, too long, his eyes scanning lines of cascading code like someone reading an old favorite novel. The numbers made sense to him. They always had. Logic, patterns, structure. It was all still there, tucked behind the calm face of a man most had forgotten even existed. One morning, a young engineer with blue hair and noise-canceling headphones walked right past Jerome, mumbling something about corrupted API calls and system latency. Jerome turned slightly, eyes drifting to the screen visible through the glass. He tilted his head. There, near the bottom, an unstable loop buried in the automation protocol. The kind of thing that'd snowball if left unchecked. He said nothing, just nodded once to himself, and walked on. Later that afternoon, the same. Engineer sat with her head in her hands while a team of 3 gathered around her terminal, tossing out theories. Jerome passed again with his mop and bucket, and one of them waved absently without looking up. "Hey, old guy, careful with that bucket. Don't want to short-circuit the floor, too." They laughed. Jerome smiled faintly and kept walking. They didn't know that he'd once written better code than any of them had probably seen in their short careers. That before he became the janitor, before he wore Lexicon's faded uniform and mopped their hallways, he had sat in front of glowing monitors writing algorithms no one else dared touch. But that was a long time ago. Another life. He knew things had changed. The world had changed. Somewhere along the line, it had stopped being enough to be good. If you were black and over 40, you had to be a miracle just to be seen. So Jerome stayed invisible. But even shadows remember the sun. And as he moved through Lexicon's glossy hallways, watching them build their digital kingdom, he knew, deep down, that one day someone would miss something important, something only someone like him would recognize. And when that moment came, he'd be ready. At exactly 8:03 a.m., the screens went black, not a flicker, not a warning, just a silent collapse. The AI-driven system that coordinated Lexicon Technologies' data center, a complex neural framework responsible for managing terabytes of real-time operations, froze, then rebooted, then froze again. Monitors throughout. The building displayed nothing but a blinking amber light in the upper left corner. Error. Core interrupted. In the engineering department, panic ignited like wildfire. Within 5 minutes, the Slack channels lit up with frantic messages. Within 10, a dozen engineers huddled around terminal stations, fingers racing over keyboards. The AI's heartbeat, usually steady and predictable, had flatlined. "No way. This is internal," muttered Zeke, one of the senior engineers. "It has to be a cyber attack. Or a memory leak in the deep chain module," offered another. A younger coder with wide eyes and trembling fingers whispered, "It's the neural prioritization queue. It's corrupting itself." None of them really knew. What they did know was that a 7-figure demonstration with a European defense contractor was scheduled for noon. A deal that would fund the company's next 3 quarters, and the CEO was already en route to Zurich to close it. Lexicon's flagship product, Prometheus AI, was supposed to run a live simulation showing seamless adaptability across distributed networks. And now, with less than 4 hours left, it couldn't even maintain a heartbeat. The CTO stormed down the hallway, phone glued to her ear, issuing clipped commands between breaths. Roll back the last stable patch. Check version 3.41. Disable auto-sync with the beta model. I don't care if it worked in testing. If it's unstable, kill it. But nothing worked. Every patch created new issues. Every restart was slower. The AI seemed to be chasing its own tail, caught in recursive logic loops that nobody had time to understand, let alone fix. By 9 a.m., the situation had boiled over. Tension oozed through every hallway like a toxic fog. In the break room, hushed voices grew sharp. Figures, someone said. We start hiring for diversity, and now the system crashes. Did you see who committed the last update? Pretty. Sure, it was that new guy. What's his name? Malik? Jerome, wiping the floor nearby, heard it all. He kept his back to them, mop steady in hand. His uniform looked no different than it had yesterday, but the way people glanced at him now, twice, 3 times, held a new edge. Suspicion. Contempt. Fear disguised as familiarity. He didn't say a word. The elevators dinged open behind him, and a small crowd of execs rushed out. The CEO's assistant, looking pale, read a message from her phone. Mr. Kessler said to restore functionality by 2 p.m. Zurich time, or he's pulling the demo. That gives us 3 hours and 22 minutes. Another voice snapped. Someone wake up whoever built this damn thing. We did, came a dry reply, and now it's eating itself alive. No one looked at Jerome. Why would they? He was just the guy who emptied trash and cleaned up coffee spills. Not someone. You'd ask for help when your $1 million AI is crashing. Not someone who could possibly understand the difference between a recursive protocol buffer and a parallel inference chain. Jerome moved quietly between rows of cubicles, collecting discarded paper cups and forgotten cans. His eyes flicked, briefly, to one of the open terminals still displaying lines of error logs. He paused just a fraction too long, just long enough for a junior engineer named Lily to glance up. She saw nothing unusual, just the janitor. Just the old guy. She went back to typing, and Jerome pushed the bin down the hallway, never breaking stride. But his mind was already inside the code. The war room was chaos. Phones buzzed, screens flashed, executives barked half-formed. Orders while engineers scribbled on whiteboards that had long since run out of clean space. Someone brought in pizza. No one touched it. At 10:15 a.m., the CTO called for an emergency sync in the main conference room, and like a school of startled fish, the crowd moved, leaving behind an eerie stillness on the operations floor. Jerome stood in the hallway, mop in hand, watching the last pair of sneakers disappear around the corner. The silence that followed felt thick, heavy, like the building was holding its breath. He looked left, looked right, then he moved. He walked past the authorized personnel only sign without a glance. The glass doors to the core system's control room had been left ajar. Someone had been in such a rush they forgot to seal them. Or maybe fate had left the door open, just a crack, just for him. Inside, the hum of dormant servers echoed like a mechanical heartbeat. Error lights blinked, red and amber. On one of the terminals, a diagnostic window flickered with a kernel panic loop. Something had gone fundamentally wrong at the root. Jerome set down his mop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, steady and precise. And then he began to type. No hesitation, no second guessing. He accessed a hidden layer of the system, a failsafe he'd recognized earlier in the week while casually watching a debugging session. It had been buried deep, almost like an afterthought. in the original architecture. The engineers hadn't touched it in months. Command line windows stacked across the screen as he ran custom scripts from memory. He bypassed authentication layers, not with brute force, but with elegance, manipulating an old legacy dev mode he'd personally helped build, back when such things were still crafted with human hands instead of neural models. The AI had entered a recursive prioritization loop caused by a misalignment in decision hierarchy within the neural net. Every cycle tried to solve a problem that didn't exist, which created data ghosts that triggered new emergency protocols. The engineers had tried patching the symptoms. Jerome dug into the root. He traced the memory leak to an obscure conditional in the emergency override code, a single line that hadn't been touched since version 2.313. He stared at it, then deleted it, then replaced it with something no one else in that building would have thought of. He ran a secure diagnostic. Memory cleared, processor load normalized. A soft green light replaced the blinking amber one. Prometheus AI rebooted. Not violently, but smoothly, like someone waking from a long sleep with clarity in their eyes. For a moment, the room was filled with a gentle hum and perfect stillness. Jerome stepped back. His fingers lingered near the edge of the desk. His reflection in the glass wall looked older than he remembered, but there was a quiet defiance in his eyes. The silence stirred memories. Years ago, he'd sat in a room not unlike this one, except back then, he wore a suit and carried a title, Senior Systems Architect. Back then, his code had won awards. His name had been in press releases, until it wasn't. They hadn't fired him. For being black, of course. No, it never looked that obvious. Instead, it was team fit. Cultural alignment. A reshuffling that conveniently moved him out of the spotlight, then out of the company. He had fought it for a while, appeals, HR, legal letters. But in the end, the cost wasn't worth it. The battle drained him. He lost his apartment, lost his savings, lost a part of himself. Until one day, a job came up. Not in coding, not in systems, custodial services, same building. Different badge. Jerome picked up the mop again and turned toward the door. He didn't leave a signature in the logs, didn't change file permissions to mark his touch. He didn't want the glory. He didn't want the job back. He just wanted to make it right. By the time the engineers returned, arguing and exhausted, the room was back to normal. Green lights glowed across the boards. The AI was stable, responsive. They stared, dumbfounded. How the hell? It fixed itself? No one noticed Jerome slipping down the hallway, mop bucket rolling silently beside him, leaving only gleaming floors and a system humming with life in his wake. The room was still humming, but now it buzzed with more confusion than code. When the engineers filed back in, expecting blinking warnings and mounting failures, they were greeted by green lights. Everywhere. The diagnostics showed stability. The AI's neural priority tree had restructured itself. Memory leaks, gone. Latency, normal. Processor load, balanced. For a full 30 seconds, no one spoke. Then came the questions. Did someone deploy a patch while we were gone? No. I didn't push anything. Did the AI autocorrect? Impossible. It doesn't have self-healing at that level. One by one, they crowded around the terminals. They pulled up logs, scoured commits, reviewed timestamps. And there, around 10:41 a.m., were the edits. 3 lines of original code deleted. 6 lines inserted. 1 diagnostic process rebuilt from scratch with a command line script so elegant it looked handwritten by a craftsman. No comments, no brag tags, no traceable user ID, just precision work, flawless. Whoever did this, Zeke muttered, knows this architecture inside and out. This isn't patchwork. This is mastery. I thought you said no one in this building understood the legacy kernel interface. I said no one currently on the team. Lily, the young engineer with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, leaned against the desk. Her brows knit in thought. I saw someone looking at these logs yesterday, she said softly. Everyone turned. She hesitated. The janitor, Jerome. Zeke blinked. What? You mean the old guy? No way. I'm serious. He stopped outside the glass, just stood there. He was reading the screen. Not like he was curious, like he understood. Another engineer laughed nervously. You think the janitor debugged a recursive neural AI system overnight? What's next? The delivery guy invents cold fusion. But Lily wasn't joking. She was already opening the security software on her machine, pulling access to camera feeds. We're not guessing. Let's check the hallway feed from 10:30. It took a few minutes. Then the screen flickered to life. There, in grainy grayscale footage, was Jerome, pushing his mop cart, pausing outside the control room, then slipping inside. The room went quiet. Zeke leaned in, muttering, "Holy." On the footage, they saw him sit. Type, work, no hesitation. Just deliberate, focused action. Fast forward, Lily said. They watched the system lights change color, the screens behind him stabilize. Then Jerome stood, picked up his mop again, and left as if nothing happened. Zeke's voice dropped. That was him. He did it. Just then, the CEO walked in. David Kessler, tall, sharp-suited, still shaking off jet lag from Zurich, stepped into the room with a practiced smile that immediately evaporated when he saw the tension. "All right," he said. "Someone talk. What the hell happened?" Silence. He scanned their faces. "The system's stable. Who fixed it?" No one spoke. Kessler narrowed his eyes. "I asked for a full breakdown. Names, commits. What happened to this team?" Zeke opened his mouth, then closed it. Lily just turned the monitor. The CEO stepped forward, frowning as he watched the footage, then watched it again. Jerome, quiet, invisible Jerome, at the heart of the most critical system in the company, performing surgery with code that none of his engineers could replicate if they tried. When the video ended, Kessler looked around the room again, as if expecting someone to say, "This is a prank." A mistake. No one did. He leaned back slightly, processing. "Well," he said finally, "find him." His voice was steady, but underneath it was something else. Not anger, not suspicion. Awe. 17 minutes. That was all it took. 17 minutes. Of silent brilliance from a man no one had ever really seen. The CEO watched the camera footage again, this time in full. Jerome's posture, his keystrokes, the precision, the confidence. He hadn't guessed his way through the error. He had understood it, at a level only the system's original architects ever could. Kessler couldn't wrap his head around it. He'd built this company from nothing, assembled teams from Ivy League talent and Silicon Valley's elite. Yet the one man who saved the project, who saved the company, wore a janitor's badge and pushed a mop every night. He called an emergency, all-hands meeting. By noon, the entire company had gathered in the main conference hall. Engineers, admins, receptionists, even interns. The crisis had rattled everyone, and rumors had started to swirl. The room buzzed with low voices, until Kessler stepped onto the stage. Behind him, the frozen frame of Jerome on the security footage filled the screen. Kessler didn't start with a speech. He didn't posture or point fingers. He just said, "I want you to meet the man who saved our entire AI core this morning, the man who rewrote what none of us could." There was a pause. Then the side doors opened. Jerome stepped in. At first, there was a wave of confusion, whispers, disbelief. The man they'd passed in the hallways for months, the man who mopped the cafeteria floors and picked up after late-night code sprints, was now walking toward the center of the room, not with arrogance, but with quiet dignity. No uniform change, no press, just Jerome. He stepped onto the stage. The room fell into stunned silence. Kessler looked at him, then turned to the staff. "We talk a lot about inclusion in this company," he said. about diversity, about recognizing talent. But I failed at that. We failed. He turned to Jerome and, before anyone could fully process what was happening, he bowed his head, a CEO bowing to the janitor. It was the kind of moment that shifted something in the air. When he stood straight again, his voice was hoarse. Jerome, I can't undo the years you've been overlooked, but I want to make it right. I want to offer you your rightful place, senior systems architect, with full back pay from the day you were let go. The room held its breath. Jerome looked around. So many faces. Most had never said a word to him. A few now couldn't meet his eyes, and yet none of it surprised him. He took a breath and shook his head. I didn't fix your system to get a promotion, he said quietly. I didn't do it for recognition. He paused. I did it because I knew how, because I saw something no one else did, and because once, when I wore a suit and spoke in meetings, I was told I didn't belong, not in words, but in how people looked at me, in how doors quietly closed. He looked out across the room. You don't need to give me a title. You just need to see the next Jerome before you look through him. And with that, he turned, walked off the stage. The room stayed quiet, a silence heavier than any applause. That day, the company didn't just reboot its systems, it rebooted its conscience. Sometimes the greatest minds wear janitors' uniforms. Thanks for listening. And remember, never judge brilliance by the badge on a shirt.